I would say don't compare it with the men's game. Go and watch it for what it is, but don't compare it.
Does that mean that still the coach's eye or the recruitment scout's eye is even more important in the women's game at the moment, because we're still waiting for all of that data and all the video systems to kind of come on stream?
You mentioned 80,000 fans at Wembley for the FA Cup final a couple of years ago, 59,000 this year, Arsenal-Chelsea. This game is growing so quickly, isn't it? It's becoming so attractive to people.
The direction we want to go in, whether it's getting those players younger and earlier age and really believing in it and developing them either in-house or on strategic loans to then have a competitive advantage. So look, the 12 WSL clubs are all Premier League clubs, and we understand the associated finances that what they earn, through the TV money, sponsorship deals, and so forth. Whilst we've had a good window, we feel, so the other clubs too. You look on paper, think, well, that's an interesting signing, and you also think, well, how do they manage to afford her? So you can only look from within and focus on what we're doing.
Welcome, football fans, to Breaking Lines, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the beautiful game like never before. I'm Gary Rowett, former player and manager, joined by the insightful Dave Carolan, a man with his finger on the pulse of football's beating heart. Together, Dave and I bring you unrivaled insight, context, and a few stories from the trenches. This is Breaking Lines, where the game is more than just a match.
Welcome back to another Breaking Lines with, and today's interviewee is Harvey Bussell, Head of Recruitment at Manchester United Women. And Harvey, it's been a busy summer for you, and you're staring down the barrel of the start of the season this weekend.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, really looking forward to it. It feels like a really long summer. Yeah, and as you say, just a few days to the opening game. Really looking forward to it.
And how has that summer been? Has there been many ingoings and outgoings at Manchester United?
There's been a few, Dave. Yeah, there's been a few kind of planned and expected, and of course, the run up to the transfer window never perhaps goes 100% how you expect it, but the most important thing is, from a recruitment perspective, that we did a lot of work prior to the window, and we're in good shape going into the season for sure. So we made some really key additions, in line with the strategy, from the club. We've got some exciting young talent as well as some experience that's joined the club. So there's a lot to look forward to.
Harvey, as a manager, those summers, the transfer side of things used to be just never ending all summer. I suppose as head of recruitment, is that the same? Are you on holiday, phone going 10 to the dozen, your missus looking at you like, is there any chance we can have some relaxation? Is it exactly the same for you?
There's no different, Gary. Yeah, in terms of the transfer window, because for that long period of 3 months, life goes on. I have a family, have to take a family holiday. It's only right. But at the same time, it's never quite smooth. But it got me out of the sun on a few occasions this summer. And of course, this summer in the women's game, not only do we have an international break, but then we have the Olympics. I've been at the Women's Under-20 World Cup, and then our transfer window, shut only a week ago. So it's been a long summer, but equally it's been interesting, exciting, and most importantly fruitful for United.
Harvey, joining Man United, where did that start? Obviously, your role that you had previously at clubs and in the scouting department and within sort of head of recruitment roles. But obviously changing over to the ladies' game, how did that sort of opportunity come about, and how did you end up at a huge club like Man United?
Yeah, sure. It's well, I was working for the academy, so I could take you back to the beginning, but maybe the pod isn't long enough for that. My experiences might come on to it later, but certainly I was working for Manchester United on the boys' academy, so I was working in the emerging talent space, working domestically, scouting players from ages under 13 up to under 21. doing a lot of games a week. I mean, the scale, the operational scale of the organisation, it's huge, but rightly so, because it's Manchester United, and they've got an incredible track record of blooding youngsters into the first team. So it's no wonder. So I found that really interesting, having the majority of my scouting recruitment experience prior to that had been, in the Championship, and then in League Two, where I first started. So to get the opportunity to work for not only a Premier League club, but Manchester United, to understand a little bit about the club and their infrastructure, as well as the operations behind the senior scout, was was fascinating. So I did that for about 9 months, and during that period, the role that I currently have was actually advertised externally, and I saw it, and they were looking for somebody with women's experience. And I think in the women's game, certainly in the WSL, there are some scouting and recruitment resources with the majority of clubs, as I understand, and some are quite well resourced. But for Manchester United, it was a new role that had been done by the members of the women's team, coaching staff and analytical staff. So it was a new role that had been created, and went through a recruitment process, although I was an internal candidate, quite lengthy. But I started in June of 2023. So right at the start of a transfer window. So admittedly, I was inspired by watching England at the Euros in 2022, when Ella Toone and Mary Earps, Lacey Roos and so forth became household names. But admittedly, my knowledge on women's football was only within that tournament. So it was a huge steep learning curve for me. And of course I knew that, and the club knew that. But what they recognised by appointing me was that I had the experience at different clubs, within different environments within those clubs, and had some adaptability, certainly at Birmingham City, where there was a need to learn quickly, to get on with people, and put some processes in place. So they recognised I had the ability to also create a team of scouts, video scouts and analysts, which happened at Birmingham and obviously later at Millwall. So I think they recognised that within me, that I could upskill and learn the nuances of the women's game, and I obviously had to get up to speed very quickly, because I came in at the start of the window. So that was the exciting challenge, understanding where the women's game was then. It's quite different to now, but it's only going to grow. And I was still working for a great club with a great history, and they were really ambitious to do well. So it made my decision making a little bit easier, in that respect, and it was really appealing. So yeah, that's how I came to be in this role.
So Harvey, based on that, you spoke there about the kind of the difference in resources potentially between the different clubs potentially in the WSL, but also your experience in the men's game. How would those infrastructure differences be apparent to you, that maybe people listening to this maybe wouldn't necessarily understand, that there are unique challenges within the women's game in the WSL, for example, which maybe don't exist in the men's game?
Yeah, I think the women's game has been around for a long time, but maybe not in the professional sense of where it is now, and it's only going to improve. And I see within within the staff and the players, there's some ultimate professionals, on both sides. They are run incredibly well. But in terms more specifically about the scouting and recruitment resources, I think that it's because the money and the finances are growing in the game, and the commerciality with it, it's only going to become more prevalent that the likes of ourselves and other clubs too are going to want to make the best decisions possible in the quickest time possible, and to gain a competitive advantage, and certainly use the global market. But the resources are really quite lean compared with the men's game. So look, the 12 WSL clubs are all Premier League clubs, and we understand the associated finances that of what they earn, through the TV money, sponsorship deals, and so forth. So how much do they want to allocate to the women's game is partly down to them. There's kind of a soft cap, if you like, financially. but it varies wildly, in the WSL. So, without having a full understanding about the competitors of Manchester City, Arsenal, Chelsea, they are, fairly well resourced and from a budget perspective. And, where we sit is we as a women's team are only 6 years old. So we are playing catch up to those bigger clubs. 6 years is a long time, but, we started in the Championship and got promoted to the Premier League. And, there's been challenges, a lot along the way for sure for the club. I've only sort of experienced it in the last 15 months or so, but it's leaner, no less professional in its own way, in terms of the differences, and I think it's only going to become more popular, as a sport to watch, not just in the stadium but on television. The indicators are clearly there, but I think clubs are going to dedicate more resource to the area of scouting and recruitment. And data too. So data at the moment is something I've been used to working with in different platforms at other clubs. So my ability is to interpret it and use it. And it's no different in the women's game, or I would say that it's probably slightly less sophisticated in terms of, the opportunity to access global data on players and different leagues. And it's, of course, it's really important that you weight leagues so you know that you're not wasting time in viewing the appropriate players for the level that you're at, things like that. So fast forward a few years, and I'm sure there'll be more companies offering even better products than they do now. But I think that's an ongoing, not necessarily challenge for the industry because it's emerging, and I think companies are recognising the way the women's game is going to.
Harvey, you spoke about the sort of growth and the commerciality, and maybe the funds are not quite there just at the minute, but there's been a couple of things, hasn't there? We spoke about the sort of, in August, I think it was the WPLL took ownership off the FA within the Women's League, and I mean, that's been partly funded by the Premier League. Do you think that's going to make any difference to the levels of opportunity now available to the Women's League that can help this sort of growth, accelerate, I suppose?
Yeah, for sure. So they got a 20 million pound sort of free loan, and how they're going to invest that, it will be really interesting, because even in the short space of time I've been in the women's game, I kind of recognise that the gap at the top of women's football in the WSL and other European and global leagues is, the standard is really good, but there's also a gap as we go down the leagues and then to the kind of the not just the grassroots but also academy football. There are some talented players, but the gap is big, and how do we bridge that? So it'll be really interesting to see with the excitement around Nicky Doucette leading the WPL, as you mentioned, Gary, is how they continue to govern the game, and how they remain connected with the FA, because they have no seat on the FA board, but also how they grow not just the game at the top level, but continue to offer opportunities and investment at grassroots, for young athletes, for young girls to come through the system. So, how they do that, I think there's been some comments I've read, from them about the challenge of gaining outside investment too. So that'll be really interesting to see, because looking at the compatriots across the Atlantic in the US, with a $240 million 5-year TV deal from the end of last year, and the way the game is growing there, there's some real competition in the global game, and it's going to be fascinating to see what happens.
In terms of growing a department there, Harvey, going back, you're obviously only in place now for 15, 16 months. How does that department operate? Did you come in? Were you the first person in, or was there already some staff there? And have you had to grow that? Do you have the capacity to grow that? And do you see the need to grow that in the next period of time as well?
Yeah, so when I came in, it was a newly created role to have somebody leading on the player recruitment side to feed, to identify talent, to assess the talent, to monitor it, but of course all that links in with a clear game model, and looking at those different positional profiles, So the resource around it, look, I'm at Manchester United, so I can rely on and collaborate with some really great departments, not just the scouting and recruitment, but other departments too. So we have a data science team on the men's side that we can lend some support, not just through some women's data, but also some practical data insight in terms of staff. The intention is from the club is to really grow the department out, in time. You're probably sure you're aware about how Man United ownership have changed through this year, and obviously now we're really excited by the new leadership team, being in place. So it'd be really, I'm really excited about some of the plans that they got going forward to really grow the department in order for us to make quicker and better decisions.
And how does that relate to, say, for example, the men's team, Harvey, with Ineos there, and the likes of Dave Brailsford? Is it a very similar structure? Is it a very similar process to how the men's recruitment would work? Is it quite aligned, or are they quite separate? Ways of working because they have to be, because they're slightly different.
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely right, Gary. It's still 11 v 11, but they're in very different markets. So the operation, obviously, from Manchester United men's side, is quite vast through their data team, their scouts and their recruitment analysts. And, in terms of the alignment, some of the processes are somewhat similar. So let me explain that. So I've always differentiated between scouting as a channel and the use of data within actual scouting, in terms of being data informed and filtering that to actually go and scout players depending on your game model and your positional profiles and so forth, and using physical data. But also there's the recruitment channel, which is always quite different from the identification channel, which should, can be equally, if not more challenging at times, depending on the landscape, and where you're at. So some of those processes to work collaboratively, as I mentioned earlier, is we will have a team of people from resource, from within the club. The head of women's football, who sits above me, my boss Matt Johnson. So he sits on that, and some wider club staff. So you're really tapping into the resource on the men's side through the recruitment process. On the scouting side, at the moment, it's me leading it and guiding it. So it's no different. I'm looking at the data available. I'm living on Y-Scout. I'm targeting the games to go to, all the tournaments to go to, and focusing not just on the here and now and window to window, which is obviously the priority, but really having a longer term view, because I can only see the game becoming more competitive. And the earlier we know about those younger players and how they develop, is only going to be, for Man United's benefit. And we've already seen some clubs work quite strategically within that, and not necessarily hoovering up young talent, but using the low market really well and having a longer term view. And that's something that in time, hopefully, we're going to aspire to keep competitive. And of course, we're no different from the men's side in terms of the Brexit rules and the GB. So we have our own criteria, which is slightly different, but it's pretty restrictive, and the leagues are banded. And some players, you think, well, they're surely going to get the points because of the level that they're at, but maybe they haven't accumulated, enough points. So it's not always easy and cut and dried, about perhaps, just bringing a player in that's done well. So it's certainly a lot to do.
Harvey targets in tournaments, Dave. I was saying he does what we all do. He's looking for one in the sunshine in December, isn't he? That's what he's doing.
Yeah, there's a few of those that I'm looking forward to now. You've obviously seen my schedule, but no, there has to be value in it. And I certainly found that this summer, going to the Euro under-19s, the under-20 World Cup, which I came back from the other week, and there's the best global talent, the best European talents on show. Some of them aren't playing for the clubs. Some players aren't on Y-Scout. So it's essential that you get the live interactions and assessment of those players.
Is it a smaller pool of players, Harvey? Like, obviously, the game is growing. The women's game is growing. The girls' game is growing. We're seeing the popularity of it off the scales. Crowds are starting to fill out the stadiums when the games are on now. Does that mean that that top pool of talent is being fought over by, a number of unique clubs at the top of the league who are trying to, as you say, they're hoover up the young talent early?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dave. So there's across the some key European leagues, some competitive leagues, judging by how well they've done in the Champions League would be Germany, France, and Spain, and in those leagues you've really got a dominant two or three clubs. And I think the WSL, just on that point, is a really competitive league, and you would probably say that the NWSL in the US is, really lead the way probably as overall competitive nature. But the small amount of talent is out there. You're absolutely right. The bigger clubs, generally with more resources over a period of time, will gyrate towards getting those players in earlier. And the Champions League is a big draw, we've found, certainly for players, and comes with the exposure of that for the clubs too. We qualified for the Champions League the previous season, and we had I'd say a good experience, not great, because the way the format is now, we were drawn against a really strong team. So we came second in the WSL, which was a huge achievement. We only missed out on winning the WSL by a couple of points, and we got to the FA Cup final that season. So it's 2 years ago. Did I say we won the FA Cup final, our first trophy last summer?
No, it hasn't been mentioned at all.
But maybe you were going to come on to that, weren't you? But yeah, 80,000 people at Wembley. We beat Spurs 4-0. It was an incredible occasion for the players, the staff, the fans. The club's first trophy. So, that's something to really aspire to in terms of continuing to compete at the top of the league to qualify for Champions League. So from a recruitment perspective, going back to your question, Dave, is yes, there's only a small pool of talent that the bigger, better clubs are fighting over, and playing in the Champions League and winning trophies is clearly going to be attractive to the better talent. So we have to work smart. We have to, whether it be through influencing, those players and agents to come and have a longer term view about maybe where we're at and the club that we are and where the direction we want to go in, whether it's getting those players younger and earlier age and really believing in it and developing them either in-house or on strategic loans to then have a competitive advantage. So we find ourselves, we're in this space at the moment. So we're in sort of a planning stage, but equally we're at the stage of wanting to win every game when the season starts next week and having a really good season.
Harvey, you mentioned about the US being almost the sort of market leaders in terms of the quality. And that's, from my limited knowledge, that's probably because they seem to value the women's game exactly the same as the men's game. They're just as proud as their national team. They'll fund it in the same sort of way to be competitive. But if you look at the market over here, it's double the spend this transfer window compared to last transfer window in the UK. You mentioned 80,000 fans at Wembley for the FA Cup final a couple of years ago, 59,000 this year, Arsenal, Chelsea. This game is growing so quickly, isn't it? It's becoming so attractive to people. How fast do you think this growth can continue, or where do you think it can get to?
Yeah, those boundaries are unclear, and it's in a bit of a nice but chaotic stage at the moment. Just going back to the US and the NWSL, that they have an obvious salary cap. They have allocation money and they have a transfer fee pot. So yes, while some clubs I understand can be quite creative around that, it's generally a fairly level playing field. Now, the other challenges there might be that maybe some of the locations of the cities and clubs might not be as favourable as others, but generally speaking, that's probably one of, if not the main reason why that the league is year on year competitive. And teams that can be maybe close to the bottom one year really compete at the top for the next. So they're doing away with their draft system as of next year. So significant changes in the NWSL, and it's a real rival because, as I mentioned earlier, some of the some of the financial opportunities, not just the experience. They're getting some really good crowds. Is going to be appealing, and certainly we're wary of that. As a club. But where's the ceiling? We're unsure. I mean, you have to kind of take your hat off to Arsenal being a pioneer with regards to how they've managed to gain all their games at the Emirates Stadium, all their home games, from a league perspective. And I think they're playing the Champions League tonight. So if they progress there, it's likely you would think that they have some additional games. And they've been, we're incredibly well supported ourselves. We had some games at Old Trafford last season where, one game in particular, Manchester City, we had over 45,000 there. So it can be done. I think it'll be challenging for certain clubs, maybe other WSL clubs at this moment, and maybe some Championship clubs. But I think if clubs can dedicate, some real expertise, what they clearly have, because the Premier League is they're global brands, yeah. Then if they can dedicate the resource, then it proves that it can be done. Where's the ceiling? Not quite sure, but it's a hugely growing sport from a participation aspect as well as viewing. It'd be really interesting to see how the clubs, and there's only a few of them at this moment in time, that don't have association with men's teams cope. So in the Championship, the second division, we have Durham, who is standalone, and we also have London City Lionesses, who again a pioneering, wealthy investor in Michelle Kang, who also owns Lyon, who are a big player in the women's game, having won the Champions League and are strong in France. And they also own a group also own Washington Spirit. So is that going to be an emerging, trend, if you like, of investment companies finding their own path, investing in the women's game, doing things differently than the traditional model of, as it currently stands, of association through men's football teams? So I think the Championship this year is going to be super competitive. You've got Newcastle have been promoted into the Championship. They were full-time in the equivalent of League Division 3. We played them in the FA Cup last season. They gave us a really good competitive game. So they're in the Championship. Then you've also got established clubs like Southampton too, Birmingham City, and they're all really striving to get in the WSL or back in the WSL in Birmingham's case, and only one team gets promoted. So it's interesting, not from where we sit, but also those teams coming up. Crystal Palace have come up from this summer. I think it's the first season in the top flight, so that'll be interesting to see how they perform.
So Harvey, you just mentioned there about Birmingham City being one of the strong teams in the Championship, but obviously you've got previous at Birmingham City, because that's when I came across you first in terms of working together with you. I know Gary had worked with you previous. Let's talk about your time in men's football and what the experiences were there, and maybe how you've taken some of the things that were really good about the men's game and transferred them across maybe into your current work now, and maybe some of the things that you saw there that maybe the women's game are doing a little bit better.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dave. Yeah, that's where it all began, Dave, at Birmingham City. I was there for 7 years, so I lasted, I think, at least twice as long as you guys. But what are 7 years? Because I was brought in as a part-time video scout and domestic scout. Within a couple of years, I was head of scouting and worked incredibly hard, within my role. But the 7 years had an awful lot. So I learned a lot, not just about the industry and how to run a club, because we're different owners through that period, but also some of the good things that you can achieve, but also if clubs are run poorly, what also can happen. So from a scouting and recruitment perspective, we probably had quite a lot. We had some initial stabilisation with Gary at the helm, and probably a bottom 5, bottom 6 budget at the time. And then, within a short space of time, due to the owners changing, as you well know, man, within a couple of years, we had probably a top 6 budget but that was spent in a pretty random, chaotic way at that time. And the knock-on effect of that was that we had the challenge of breaking profit and sustainability rules. So therefore we had a permanent transfer ban, so we can only deal in the loan markets, and free agents. So all these challenges, and the scout and recruitment department really was probably one of the stabling influences, as well as probably the medical department, because of the way the staff are there and how good they are in amongst this kind of this not chaotic it was fairly chaotic, let's be frank about it. And of course it's such a great club, for so many reasons, with long standing staff there, the fan base was incredible and you want it to do so well. So in amongst this, well, I'm going to stick to what I can do and influence my department and a couple of the scouts, video analysts, and recruitment analysts, and the videos that I've got. And we're going to have a diligent, because while all this is going on, we need to be ready and we need to be prepared to deliver when the owners or manager at that time. And after Gary left, I think we had 6 managers or head coaches within 5 years. So you've got all these different game models, and you have all these different levels of expenditure. So the adaptability required from myself and my staff is, well, what players and what positions for the next window or two. It really was quite short term. You always want a longer term view, and you're always reporting, on players and grading and recommended and using a database for the long term, because if you see good players, you like something about them, then it has to be fed back into the system. But it was very much a case of, well, what's going to happen in the short term? As an example, I remember being told quite early on in one summer transfer window we've done some prep for, we're not going to sign any championship players for the next 2 windows due to outside influence with regard to the owners. So where we were at that time, we were bottom third in terms of our league finish placing. We're now not going to do that. So got to think quickly. And okay, well, where does the club want to go in terms of their recruitment then and scouting if we're not going to achieve that? And you have to comply with what the club and the owners want. Yeah, you pay well, you stay on track. So then you delve into the 21 market. You then have a look at lower leagues. But obviously, where are those foreign leagues going to be more appropriate, either for the manager or for the owner? And you try and sit down with them and draw out as much information and anticipate which direction they might want to go in. So we thought of that particular summer that we really need to focus on some Southern European countries and leagues. At that time, we were very much focused on Scandinavia, just in terms of that culture and that the physical capability of adapting to the championship. We looked a lot at the Bundesliga, second division, France Division 2, Austria, Switzerland, because that was comparable on league weighting in terms of the physical demands of the championship. But we thought, we sensed we're going down this route. So we took an interest more in some of the Spanish players, French, Portuguese, and so forth. So when the time came, and lo and behold, it did come, that we knew they were being influenced by agents in that part of the world, then we were ready to react with our evidence. Well, we've seen, this is the data, this is the knowledge, these are the live reports, these are the video scout reports, and offer our opinion and insight. And of course, the club owners and the leadership, if they want to go in a certain direction, then all you can do is provide that and, comment. And if we were to go down this route, where does that leave us? And lo and behold, some of the players that we brought in that later in that January, or that summer window and later in the January window, they were gone within 6 months. They were back either permanently on loan in Spain. So it's that preparation underneath, and we kind of anticipated that. So where do we go next? So in terms of a learning experience, that's just a few examples, but in terms of a learning experience, to work with the amount of different managers and head coaches, the ownership, keeping stability within the team. I managed to recruit a couple of really fantastic staff. One of our scouts went on to become an analyst within the club, has gone on to do really well, and Pete Shuttleworth. But Tom Gallagher I recruited from Crystal Palace, because I've never worked in the Premier League and I wanted a different insight from his experiences, not just from the leaders he'd worked under, but some of their processes. And then we had an analyst that worked at Swansea, and they had a successful campaign, not just in the Premier League, but in Europe. So again, that was additional skills that I hadn't got that I wanted to bring to the team. So there was certainly some stability and some thought and strategy that went into us as a department. And of course, we were asked at certain times to, to recommend those players, and other times it was very much a case of be patient and be prepared because of the way the club was being run at that time. But it was a great learning curve, and I really felt that the importance of processes at that time. When within football, you have to have a starting point. You have to commit to that and be flexible to adjust accordingly. But without that, to have some randomness in some of those transfer windows outside of your control, it's not good business sense. It's not good for the culture. It's not good for the environment, the players. The fans might get a little bit excited about some signings they maybe haven't heard of, but it really drummed down on me the importance of having the right processes for my next role.
Harvey, when you see some of the clubs, of course, across Europe, and they seem to have a very, very strong model in terms of how they want to run, they'll have a style of play, they'll have a game model, that'll be entwined with a sort of community and fans. They lose a head coach, a recruitment team helps replace that head coach with someone with similar, data. And we've seen that seeping over to the likes of Brentford, the likes of Brighton that have done it really successfully. How surprised are you in the Championship? We see it time and time again where, a club gets rid of a manager after 9 games, or a club gets rid of a manager 2 games into the season. We've seen all of these things this season already. How surprised are you that chaotic nature of UK football? And do you think that needs to change, or do you think that will certainly benefit from change?
I continue to be surprised, but also not surprised, because it's such an exciting, demanding league, isn't it? There's 46 games. To get promoted, you're into the promised land of the Premier League, and of course, every club, when they get rid of managers so early, Gary, will have their own opinion and own stance of why they needed to make that decision at that time. And of course, unless you're really in it and around it and understand it, sometimes as a fan, I'm sure it can be difficult. And of course, there's only 3 teams that get promoted, but probably the vast majority of those Championship teams will have aspirations, certainly the managers and players and fan bases, of actually doing really, really well. So there's the additional pressure. So is there an easy answer that there's going to be less movement in terms of the managers? Is there going to be less investment from foreign owners looking, to get promoted into the Premier League? I don't see it in the short term. I think for the good of the game, it would probably be healthy, but it's difficult to adjust that dial, should we say now. I would hope that some clubs would. I've seen a little bit of evidence of some clubs maybe not doing quite as well, but sticking with their managers and then getting promoted again. But certainly the expectations of when you are a big club or been in the Premier League and come down, there's the expectation of getting back there as quickly as possible, isn't there? So it's it does surprise me, but also it doesn't. What do you think?
I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant because I need a job. That's why I was asking. I'm hoping there's loads more sackings sometime soon. No, it does surprise me a little bit, because I think that, I just think if you look at, being, not always, but most of the times you're successful as a club, it's because you have stability and it's because you grow continually. Not there are anomalies to that, isn't there? And I think we've seen it probably with, we've done another podcast on sporting directors. I think that every club now having a sporting director, there seems to at least be that will to try and have a little bit more unity and a little bit more of a streamlined approach. I don't mean every club's got it right yet, because it's a newish role in the UK, but it just always surprises me when teams just lurch from play to play and struggle, because having someone like yourself, having seen that at Birmingham, how difficult it is to be successful. The fans don't always see that, do they? But to be successful, it's really, really hard to work in those conditions.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And sometimes the business principles of the, not just the owners, the directors, that have allowed them to be successful in their own field. Slightly different rules apply because, as you said there, most businesses will have, steady growth. Those that are successful over a period of time will evolve and grow at their own rate, or take advantage of market conditions, maybe, or be imposters and startups and so forth. But there's the randomness associated with, with football managers and probably players too. But having a long-term strategy, you would imagine that a lot of clubs, championship clubs too, will have that. But where does that link in with regards to the amount of churn that there's been, not just in the championship, but other leagues too, and across Europe as well?
Harvey, just going back on to the whole idea of how recruitment happens, and you said at the start there that maybe some of the tools that the men's game have available to them, like the Y Scout, like the Stats Bomb, where they've got data on every league, on every player. Does that mean that certainly in the women's game still, while those software or support services are developing and generating over years and years worth of data, does that mean that still the coach's eye or the recruitment scout's eye is even more important in the women's game at the moment, because we're still waiting for all of that data and all the video systems to kind of come on stream? So there's still as much emphasis on the scout being able to spot players as the data guys or the video analysts being able to spot players.
Yeah, I think Y Scout is a platform where it does have a really good number of leagues, not all leagues. So I think that's a really useful tool, because you don't get the full picture, obviously. You don't get the wide angle. You don't experience what the players do in the warm up and how they're interacting. You don't see necessarily the interactions with the coach because it only takes part of the game. But it's a really good tool for filtering, and certainly some of those data platforms are starting to emerge, Dave. So you can only deal with what's available to you, and I still really value, being at a game and absorbing that. I gain a lot from it. And equally in the women's game, the what I found is that they tend to have a lot of different roles through the course of a season. So taking a good sample set, they will play different positions. So you really need to delve into that and take time within that data. That's notwithstanding, the tactical elements, because as we know, data is subjective. You think subjective, but you choose that data and what it offers you, and you take from it what you want. So, and it doesn't account for the tactical elements of the game or of the coach, does it? So I value it. I'm data informed by it. I use it as a filtering, but by no means do I wholly rely on it at this moment in time of where we're at, in terms of what's out there.
Where do you see this season going, Harvey, for Man United in terms of, obviously Emma Hayes has left Chelsea. They've been pretty dominant in the women's game, haven't they? And you guys, weren't in the top four last season for the first time, but like you said, won an FA Cup. So where do you see this season? Is there a little bit more, not internal pressure, I suppose, but is there an expectation to really get back in that top four? Is that a course the aim for Man United ladies this season?
Yeah, it's certainly our aim to win trophies, and as I alluded to earlier, the to qualify for the Champions League in its current format, we have another year of the current format, is to achieve a top three finish, and we've got some well established teams, as I mentioned before, currently above us, but we've also got the chasing pack, if you like. So from Aston Villa, Liverpool, Tottenham Hotspur, but you can go right down. It's a 12-team league, and as we've seen and as we experienced last season, on their day, those teams at the bottom, you don't take them lightly because they can achieve a result, and it's it is competitive. But certainly our expectations is to have consistency at the top end of the table. It's going to allow us to hopefully attract consistently the best players. And there's going to be twists and turns of the season, no doubt. Emma Hayes is obviously moved on, but they have a really experienced coach from Lyon that have taken her place. And I'd like to think that we've done some really good recruitment this summer with some young.
We'll find out about that, won't we, Harvey?
We'll find out about it. Maybe I should keep quiet until we've won a few games. But we've got some really young, exciting talent that are nowhere near the peak of their careers, so they're going to hopefully develop and grow with us, and and get better and drive us forward. But we've also mixed it in with some existing experienced players, and also Dominique Janssen, who we managed to purchase from Wolfsburg in Germany, and she's got a great history in the game and experienced international. So her leadership's going to be vital as we experience the challenges of the WSL and a couple of cup competitions. But whilst we've had a good window, we feel, so have the other clubs too. You look on paper, think, well, that's an interesting signing, and you also think, well, how do they manage to afford her? So it's you can only look from within and focus on what we're doing. And I'm sure Mark, the head coach, and the wider staff and the players are focusing, on ourselves this season. That's really important.
Let's take it all the way back to your genesis in this relationship with Gary Rowett, which is all the way back to the Cambridge United days. When you were starting out there, did you ever see yourself as head of recruitment at Manchester United? Or was that the furthest thing from your mind at that stage?
I won't answer that one. You answer that one, Harv.
It's fair to say that I've known Gary for a long time. We weren't always best friends. We're probably still not now. No, going to let that out. So I've known Gary for a long time in a time where football was very different. And I reflect fondly on the learning experiences, because lower league football was pretty brutal in the early 90s. And the physicality of the game and the way the game was there, looking back, it was something I really struggled with for all my high quality technical ability. So I quickly realised around the age of sort of 19 or maybe even 20 that, I wasn't going to hit the heights that I really aspired to in the game. Nevertheless, I was still my love was football, So yes, I didn't imagine that I would be working for Man United, however many years on. Don't want to give away my age, but I also knew that I was going to be connected with the game forever. So I've played as often as I could, be it non-league. I've represented the Army international tournaments and took my coaching badges and worked in academies, and I've got a good understanding of the game that I've learned through others, but also learned from myself and my experiences, and came into scouting and probably on the back of that, from going into coaching to watching the opposition, analysing them into scouting was a route that I didn't think was going to happen. Didn't plan it that way, but when I found a kind of niche that it could connect the dots, I would take a real interest in the tactical and the technical side of the game, together with my experiences that I really run with the scouting roles that I've had, and tried to learn and develop and taking on more responsibility. And by no means do I know all in the men's game and now in the women's game, but I've got a lot of well-rounded experience in recruiting players and scouting and managing teams of people both in football and out, and recruiting the right people. And I think that's the bedrock, not just of football but any industry, is taking the time to get the right people around you and working collaboratively together. And again, that's another big learning from the great people that I've worked with, is you maybe don't appreciate people at the time because you're busy, but it's when you collaborate and work and you're really aligned as a club and a department, then it's so rewarding. The buzz of football, yes, we're not on the pitch, we're in the stand or in front of watching Y scouting games, but you're still heavily connected with the game. We still have influence, and it's at times it's chaotic and demanding and stressful, but also really rewarding too. So, no, I certainly didn't think I'll be at Man United, but I'm certainly going to embrace the opportunity. And I work with some great people, incredible club, and the future's bright, certainly for Manchester United women.
Dave, when Harvey says technical qualities, he had a beautiful left foot, mate. I've got to say to him, he had a lovely left foot. I mean, I'd go and say, well, I've crossed a few balls in, because you always knew that he was going to stick it on your head and you were going to get some decent practice. So, but one thing, I mean, we've known each other a long time. One thing I would say, it sounds like there's only one thing I would say, but one thing I would say is no matter what you've done, you've always found your love for football and found your way back into football. You know, like no matter where you found yourself career-wise, I'm talking more about the younger days. There was always that. It always felt to me that passion for football, you know, it wasn't enough to do a different job. It was always going to be a future in football for you. Where do you know, when you look at just one last one from me, when you look at the women's game, I would imagine a lot of people working in the women's game from a financial aspect would always be looking towards the men's game for opportunities. But are there similar opportunities in the women's game growing for people like you? If you want to get to a certain level, or if you want to advance like most people do, are there those opportunities structurally within the women's game, or will there be to stay in it and actually be brilliant at doing what you're doing there?
Yeah, certainly. I've seen some jobs in recent months within the women's game, whether it be video scouts, whether it be recruitment personnel, analysts, even a loans manager. Because there's only 12 WSL teams, there's 11 championship teams. You know, there's probably less opportunity. And as kind of what you alluded to there with regards to the desire to work in men's football, maybe because of the exposure, you know, is greater and there's more opportunity. But what I would say is that the women's game, you know, is growing, and where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years time? So, you know, I'm in it, and maybe I'm one of the lucky ones in that respect of, you know, that I've been working in full time in football for a number of years. Is that I think, you know, if you want to work in the women's game, then there will opportunities there are, and more will open up. But like anything, I'd recommend really understanding maybe the markets that you want to work in, the industry that you work in. And I've found huge benefit of, you know, some of my scouts and analysts that I've recruited of having in-depth knowledge and expertise. You know, many have been coaches, many have played at high levels of football, so they understand the game at the professional level, which can only aid. But if you haven't, there's still a pathway for you. You know, and you know, you've got to make things happen, and hopefully, if you know, if you really want to get into the women's game, then get yourself out there, you know, but understand the markets, understand the players, understand game models, understand the positional profiles, get to understand data, have a refined eye on what clubs may want to recruit and why. Put yourself in the coach's shoes if you haven't coached before, and all those elements. So it's a passion for me, and if it's a passion for other people too, then there's no reason why opportunities won't present themselves. And I think there'll be more opportunities in the future in the women's game.
Well, Harvey, it's been a fascinating talk with you, and thanks so much for giving us your time and giving us the insights of your current position at Manchester United and your career as a whole. Is there anything you think that's going to be fundamental to the development of the women's game in the next 5 or 10 years that you think would be key for our listeners to recognize as the game continues to grow?
I would say, don't compare it with the men's game. Go and have fun. Go and watch it for what it is, but don't compare it. You know, and maybe that was initially my thoughts because it's something that I've been used to. You know, you'll find a different, in-game experience, maybe a different demographic. So if there's a club near you at whatever level, you know, go and support it. Go and recognise the enjoyment and be part of it. It's not going away. It's only gonna stay. So why not? Whatever community you're in, whatever club you support, go along. It's a less parochial. You know, of course, there's rivalries. You know, we still want to beat our Northwest rivals and those in London, of course. But you know, it is a different environment. It's pleasant. It's a smaller, tighter knit community. But I also feel that they've become, as the commercialization and finance probably increasing more competitive, maybe from an in-house perspective, but go and enjoy it and appreciate it for what it is, because, we've got some fantastic footballers in this country, not just English players, some really top foreign players too, that they are the best in the world. So take it what it is, acknowledge it and appreciate them, and go and absorb it, will be my recommendation.
Well said, Harvey.
Well, thanks, Harvey. We wish you well for the season as it's about to start, and we'll certainly be able to weigh and measure all of your recruitment. So we wish you well for the performances on the pitch and for your recruitment, for all those players to do really well.
Thanks, Dave. And I can't believe that you didn't ask me any questions about the how I transform Millwall, but maybe that's for another part.
Yeah, obviously we have a part 2 lined up for this, Harvey. So, the Millwall years will come up then.
Can't do all your accomplishments, Harvey, in one go.
Pleasure to be a guest on your show, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Great talking to you.
Brilliant. Cheers, Harvey.
Thank you, Harvey.